Split Between Chapter 2 by Armand Rosamilia and Jay Wilburn. Split Between is a serial novel that will appear on both Jay Wilburn's Patreon page, patreon.com/Jay Wilburn, and Armand Rosamilia's Patreon page, patreon.com/Armand Rosamilia. The odd number chapters will be on Jay Wilburn's page on the 1st of every month, and even numbered chapters will appear on Armand Rosamilia's page on the 15th of every month. Wilburn's chapters follow the strange events of Devil's Fork, South Carolina, from the perspective of Jenna Colby. Armand's chapters follow the same events from Eric Colby's point of view. You can enjoy the novel a few different ways. You can become a $1 patron on both pages and read all the chapters. We highly recommend this approach. You can also be a patron of one of the pages and follow the story from one character's perspective. It works either way, but the fullest experience is reading all the chapters. As you decide where to spend your dollars, you can enjoy chapters 2 and 4 from Armand Rosamilia in May and June of 2021 for free, and enjoy chapters 1, 3, 5, and 7 from Jay Wilburn when they drop from May through August. So right now all the chapters are free. I guess you call that a magnet or a lost leader, I'm not sure. Check out the master list with links to all the chapters as they drop twice a month, and that's what I just shared in chat. Alright, so we're going to read Armand's chapter 2, and like I said, hearing this chapter now is not going to ruin chapter 1 for you, so if you decide to go back and read that one, you can do so. And the story's going to build obviously as we go, and this is a great chapter. Armand wrote this one, and it's wonderful, and of course I have his permission to share it because we're co-writing the thing, and it's free right now. Split Between Chapter 2, published May 15th, 2021 by Armand Rosamilia. When Eric Colby got home, he noticed the front door ajar. His mind immediately went to work on problem solving before he'd even gotten out of his car. Jenna had gone out and hadn't pulled it closed behind her. She'd done it once before, last January 10th. It was unlikely but possible she'd done it again. Maybe the wind had knocked it open somehow, although Eric didn't think the wind was strong enough today. There was nothing wrong with the lock either. Instead of getting out, he dialed her phone. If she was inside and he asked her, she'd rush to the door and try to close it so he didn't notice. She'd know he'd noticed, but he'd let it go. He was giving her a chance to correct it. You need to lighten up, Eric, before your head explodes or the stick up your ass punctures a vital organ, his partner at the architectural firm, Kyle Chambers, would always say. While Kyle was the fun one, the guy who was the life of the party and who could make clients comfortable enough to hire them, Eric did all the grunt work, and he loved it. He hated interacting with people. He preferred his head down with a pencil in his hand, a ruler in the other. Old school architecture, not this computer-generated joke they use today. You created a building room by feel, by the faint trace of a line on paper, not by clicking a mouse. Of course, Kyle would argue about it with Eric and scan in the finished work. If changes were needed, Eric would have to do it by hand and hand it to Kyle to rescan. It was a lot of extra work, but in the end, it worked for Eric. Jenna not answering her phone didn't work for him, though. He let it ring and left a message. "I'm in the driveway, honey. The door is open. Call me back." He hung up and got out of his car. He knew the look she'd give him. Not anger, not understanding. Eric could never put his finger on it, but Jenna always held her breath when they had these talks. She'd once, in the beginning of their relationship, called him condescending. He couldn't help it. He never yelled. He never talked over someone. He would argue his point in a calm, collected manner, which he knew infuriated some people. It had driven his sister away, as well as his parents, who only talked to him on holidays and a quick call on birthday each year, rushing to get off the phone. Kyle called him Sheldon behind his back based on a character from the Big Bang Theory television show, which Eric had never watched. He only watched the news at night, between 6 and 7, before shutting off the TV and reading for 2 more hours, then bedtime. He'd stopped explaining to Jenna what a waste of time it was to watch sitcoms and reality TV shows. She watched ridiculously bad holiday movies where the evil businessman came to the small town and fell in love with the florist and saved her farm. Jenna. Eric pushed open the door and stepped inside. He didn't hear the TV on, which meant she wasn't home. Usually when he walked in and called out, she'd turn it off in the kitchen or living room before answering. She knew it was time to connect with him on a personal level without distractions. The focus needed to be on them and dinner. Tonight would be meatloaf, maybe with the recipe his mother had used. Eric liked only certain foods, and they needed to be eaten on certain days. in a rotating manner. Meatloaf every 22 days. It didn't matter if it was a holiday or they were going to dinner. Meatloaf was to be eaten. Jenna could eat whatever she wanted, although he strongly suggested they eat the same meal together. She'd never, ever eaten anything different. Even though we're going to eat tonight at the new restaurant in Myrtle Beach with clients, it makes sense for you to also have a ribeye and baked potato. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Makes sense for you to eat a ribeye and baked potato. Eric had told her last Tuesday, if we were home, we wouldn't have different meals. Jenna. Eric closed the door behind him. She was out. He didn't smell meatloaf. This was not good. Frowning, Eric took a few steps, intended to search the kitchen for a note and his dinner. He saw blood on the floor. Crimson slashes. If Eric was an irrational man, he'd rush headlong into the house and cry out for his wife, hoping not to find her body, stumbling over a crime scene and compromising evidence. Instead, he calmly stepped back outside and closed the door. He called 911. I arrived home and my front door was ajar. I see blood in the hallway. I need the police to come to my home. I fear my wife has been murdered. He tried to add as much emotion as he could, but knew he still sounded robotic. Depending on which way an investigation went, he knew he'd be the primary suspect. He knew how this worked, but reminded himself not to get too far ahead of the detectives. If he offered any ideas or seemed too willing to clear his name, they'd grow suspicious. Better to let it play out and see where it went. Eric went and stood next to his car. He genuinely hoped Jenna was safe. Maybe she'd been attacked and it was her attacker's blood on the floor. Maybe the rest of the house was clean. She'd fled and was in the neighbor's house. When the police arrived, she'd walk up, hysterical, and tell them what happened. Are you still on the line, sir? Eric took a deep, exaggerated breath. Yes, ma'am. I'm trying to hold it all together. My wife was supposed to be home. I just arrived from work. Stop. Don't give her your itinerary and an alibi so quickly. Just let this play out. The door was open. There was blood. He knew repeating the few facts he knew seemed right. Certainly, he hadn't done anything. Who would? They had no enemies, no bitter rival, architectural firm sending a message because Eric stole a job, no neighbors with a grudge, their families were barely on the radar. There was no huge life insurance policy that anyone could benefit if either were dead. Nothing out of the ordinary. Neither had a criminal record. They didn't befriend shady characters, and no one in the family or friend circle had been in jail, as far as Eric knew. No drugs, no drinking, no gambling, or deviant sex. Eric didn't even look at porn on his computer for fear of spyware and malware. The police arrived, lights and sirens, 2 cruisers. They parked at odd angles in front of the property, as if they were filming a cop show. 2 officers, one tall and skinny, the other older, squatter, and sloppier, were on either side of Eric in seconds. Eric explained what had happened so far. Door ajar, blood on the floor, dispatcher on the line, lights and sirens. You're here. Is my wife inside? He thanked the woman on the line and disconnected. Watched as both officers went inside the house. Another police cruiser arrived, parked behind Eric's car in the driveway. Eric explained what happened to this new person, a woman wearing a nice pantsuit, a detective. She went inside too. The neighbors across the street, Mark and Christina Lister, came out and both gave Eric a wave. He pretended not to notice and edged toward the front door. It's better if you stay outside, the tall officer said as he stepped onto the path. Eric heard more nosy neighbors approaching. Is Jenna inside? Is she okay? Eric asked, crossing his arms. He was worried. While he'd been accused of being emotionless, he did have a heart. He did love Jenna, and she was a good mate. Someday he'd always thought they'd have children together, although they'd only mentioned it a few times in passing. The detective came out. She didn't look happy. Your wife isn't inside. Thank God, Eric said, even though the idea of a higher power, an omnipotent being who cared about them, was ridiculous. It was more an expression. Then what happened? There's a lot of blood. We found her phone near the stairs. Her clothes and drawers are scattered. It looks like there was a struggle. The detective glared past Eric. Get forensics out here and get some crowd control, Perkins. We need this roped off immediately. She turned back to Eric. Did you have any problems with anyone? No, of course not. Drugs or weapons in the house? Eric shook his head. How much blood did you find? If a person lost more than 40% of their blood, they would die. That was 0.53 gallons of blood in the average person. From what he'd seen, it wasn't a lot of blood, more like a deep cut on a finger or a really good nosebleed. My wife will get nosebleeds. Is it possible that's all it is? We're not sure. I'd like you to come down to the station and we'll talk, she said. I'll follow you. Eric was not going to rely on them to get him home afterward. If he thought they were trying to bully him into a false confession, he'd call a lawyer and leave right away. He was about to mention taking a lie detector test to clear him quickly, but thought it might sound like something a guilty party would say. Instead, he tried to force tears and failed. He knew the detective was staring too hard at him. She was already trying to pin the murder on Eric. Murder? No, that was a stretch. Some blood on the floor, and her phone didn't mean much. Was anything missing? Was it a home robbery in the middle of the day? Doubtful. All right, Eric made sure to follow her closely as they pulled out of the driveway. He ignored the neighbors, all staring and wondering what he'd done wrong. It hopefully lessened their inquiries since he was driving his own vehicle and not in the backseat of a squad car like a guilty man who'd murdered his wife. He loved Jenna despite her minor flaws. She was a lovely person. He was attracted to her. They had deep and meaningful conversations. They made love on a semi-regular basis. She was intelligent, fun, and a lot more fun than he'd ever be. Jenna was missing, hurt, without her phone. Where was his wife?